You've worked hard since you arrived in the city, gained loads of experience, developed your skills. Everywhere you look, you see something you helped build. But now, you're looking to the future, and maybe you're thinking about where you come from. In Ireland, we need planners, carpenters, plumbers, roofers, engineers, architects, site managers, and more. We need you, with all your skills and knowledge, to help us build thousands of homes. You've built the world. Now come back and build the home that built you. For more information, visit gov.ie/Building Ireland. Brought to you by the Government of Ireland.
This episode is brought to you by Paranormal Playback, a new podcast where hosts Shar, Mel and Laura recap the spooky and entertaining world of paranormal reality TV. Each week they take a fresh look at popular shows like Ghost Adventures and Kindred Spirits, blending humour with insight as they pull apart what's happening on screen. The three of them are a mix of believers and skeptics, which makes for really fun conversations, sometimes leaning into mystery, other times asking the questions viewers might be thinking themselves. With their background in creative production, they know how these shows are put together, so they're great at pointing out the moments that feel real versus the ones that might be more for the cameras. And their segment, This Old Haunt, digs into the true crime side of paranormal investigations, separating fact from fiction. With Halloween coming up, it's the perfect time to add something spooky, funny and a little addictive to your playlist. For even more spooky, ghostly, paranormal content with a humorous spin, go check out Paranormal Playback. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Scary. I'm your host Will, and each week I narrate your real life paranormal encounters as well as some famous paranormal cases along the way. And before we get into this week's episode, as always, we need to say a special thank you to our new Patreon subscribers, who are Lucy Usherwood, Lucy, Didge, Donna Worley, Cece and Soupy, Laura Brazel, Tash, Ren Silver. Thank you so much for signing up to the show's Patreon. And if this is something you're interested in, you can find the link in this episode's show notes, or simply go to patreon.com/scaryaparanormalpodcast, where you can gain access to ad-free main episodes and exclusive scary episodes. But now, let's get into our next paranormal encounter. In spring 2001, Stephen LaChance, a single father of three, was urgently seeking a new home for his family in Union, Missouri. His marriage had collapsed, and he had been raising his daughter and two sons alone in a cramped apartment. When an ad appeared for a large 2-story white house with a yard in a quiet neighbourhood, Stephen jumped at the opportunity. The landlady, an eccentric older woman, showed the house to prospective renters one Sunday. She guided Stephen and his daughter through the place almost like it was a museum exhibit. The house was charming. Cherub murals ringed the living room ceiling, and elegant original woodwork and columns divided the parlour from the family room. There were 2 floors, 3 bedrooms upstairs, a spacious kitchen, and even an old-fashioned butcher's shower in the basement. It was far more space than Stephen ever thought he could afford for his kids. As they finished the tour, the landlady fixed Stephen with a strange question. "You understand the responsibility that comes with living in an old house such as this?" Stephen eagerly agreed. "Oh yes, it's beautiful," he replied, not truly grasping what he was agreeing to. The landlady gave a non-committal answer that she'd get back to him. A week later, she phoned with the good news. The house was theirs. Stephen was overjoyed. That upcoming Memorial weekend, May 2001, he and the children moved into 809 North Christina Avenue, hopeful for a fresh start. Moving day was sunny and uneventful, until a brief unsettling encounter. As the family unloaded boxes, a car rolled past. A local man leaned out the window and called to them with a cryptic remark. "I hope you get along okay here." Then the car sped off. Stephen's daughter turned to him puzzled. "What do you think that was about, Dad?" He tried to shrug it off. "Friendly neighbours, I suppose?" In hindsight, that drive-by warning was the first hint of the house's dark reputation. Their first night in the home passed peacefully. Exhausted from moving, the family slept soundly. But daylight revealed odd details in the old house. For one, each interior door had an antique hook-and-eye latch on the outside, not to lock rooms from the inside, but rather to lock something in. Stephen decided to keep that observation to himself, not wanting to spook the children. Another curious incident happened as Stephen began hanging pictures. His daughter thought a painting of two angels would nicely complement the cherub theme in the living room. But every time Stephen hung the heavy framed picture on the wall, it crashed to the floor within moments. He rehung it twice, each time the same result. On the third try, he felt a whoosh of air and the frame smacked to his ankles as if thrown. Irritated, he firmly reset the picture hook. To his surprise, the picture stayed up after that. More subtle red flags began to pop up. From the front porch that weekend, the LeChance kids noticed something off about the neighbours' behaviour. His daughter pointed out people walking along the sidewalk. Each time they neared the LeChance's property line, they crossed the street to the opposite side, only to cross back after passing the house. The family sat on the porch for 3 hours, watching person after person refuse to walk in front of their home. Stephen tried to rationalise it. Maybe the new neighbours were shy or uncomfortable, but in his gut he knew it was bizarre. Clearly locals knew something about this house that he didn't. Within days of moving in, the strangeness escalated from curious to downright creepy. It was late May, yet Stephen noticed the trees in the yard were shedding leaves as if it were autumn. He made a mental note to mention the foliage problem to the landlady, not yet connecting it to anything supernatural. That Sunday after church, the family busied themselves with yard work. Happy to have a yard after all after apartment living. Stephen's youngest son, aged 8, volunteered to fetch the garden hose from the basement so they could wash down the sidewalks. The boy bounded inside while Stephen raked leaves out front. Moments later, a shriek of terror from within the house. Stephen sprinted inwards to find his little boy standing in the kitchen in a puddle of urine, shaking uncontrollably. Stephen asked his son what had happened, and the child replied, "Something chased me up the basement steps." Trying to stay calm, Stephen asked what exactly had chased him. His son went on to tell him that something big had chased him up from the basement. Stephen and his older son searched every corner of the basement but found nothing. Just a dropped garden hose on the floor. Stephen later recalled that there was real fear in his son's eyes. Something had horrified the boy so much that he had lost control of his bladder. For the next few days, nothing major happened, and the family's life settled into a normal routine of school and work. But one strange thing persisted consistently. Lights turning on by themselves. Every single evening, the LaChances returned home to find every light in the house blazing, even if they had double-checked and turned them all off before leaving. At first, Stephen blamed the kids, assuming they had left lights on. So one morning, he had all 3 children walk with him room to room, ensuring all switches were off. Yet that evening, they walked into an empty house fully illuminated in every room. This happened repeatedly. And it began to dawn on Stephen that something inexplicable was at play. He was quoted as saying, "There was no logical reason for all of the lights to be on other than someone or something in our house." Soon the family experienced dramatic temperature fluctuations. One room would be comfortably warm, while an adjacent room felt like a meat locker, with a 30-degree drop in temperature. On one occasion, Stephen stepped from a warm hallway into an icy cold living room. He felt the first unmistakable presence of the entity. He said, "It felt like an electrical current running through my body, bringing tears to my eyes and bumps to my arms." The sensation passed quickly, but left him shaken and muttering to himself, what the hell was that? Clearly an unseen force was making itself known. Sunday, June 3rd, 2001. The children were chatting with their dad in the living room, excited about visiting Grandma the next day, while Stephen planned a work trip to Indianapolis. It was around dusk. The children had their backs to the adjoining family room, and Stephen was facing them, which is why he was the only one to see it. Out of the corner of his eye, something moved. Stephen gave a quick glance towards the kitchen doorway that led to the family room. There stood a figure. Stood before him was a dark, man-shaped silhouette, despite the room being fully lit. He doubted his eyes and looked away, but a surge of adrenaline hit him. When he looked back, the figure was still there, now moving slowly into the family room. It appeared as a man made of rolling black smoke, solid in outline but internally whirling. Stephen described it as a churning mass of turning blackness. This mass then melted into thin air and vanished. In that moment he knew 2 things. 1, he had just seen a ghostly apparition in full daylight, and 2, he had to protect his children. He later admitted the thoughts racing through his mind. We could run screaming into the night like those crazies in the movies, or we could get up quietly, leave the house, and figure this out. He chose calm. "Let's go get a soda and see Grandma." The kids looked at him like he was a bit nuts. It was nearly bedtime, but the youngest was delighted at the prospect of a late treat. Luckily, Stephen's car keys were on the coffee table. He grabbed them and ushered the confused children out to the front door in an orderly exit, trying to keep his voice steady. As soon as Stephen turned to lock the front door, from the inside of the empty house came a deafening sound. Stephen described it as a loud, painful scream of a man in agony. This scream reverberated so loudly through the walls that it could be heard across the neighbourhood. Dogs all around began howling and barking at the noise. It sounded, Stephen said, as if he was screaming in pain. The kids, now frightened, all clambered into the car. And just as they were pulling out of the driveway, his 8-year-old son, the same boy who had seen the basement monster, looked back and gasped, "Daddy, the basement monster is standing in the upstairs window." Stephen couldn't resist. He glanced in the rearview mirror towards the house, and sure enough, the black, smoky figure was visible in an upstairs bedroom window, watching them leave. That night, the family slept at Stephen's parents' home. The next morning, he left on his scheduled business trip, reluctantly leaving his kids under Grandma's care for the week. During his time away, Stephen battled with himself to find rational explanations. Did he imagine it? Could it be some elaborate prank? By week's end, practicality won out. They had nowhere else to go. Stephen had spent all his savings on deposit and moving. He couldn't just abandon the rental. After a week of self-debate and perhaps a bit of denial, he decided to take his family back to Union House once he returned from his trip. Friday night they moved back in. For a couple of days nothing happened, as if the house was lulling them back into complacency. Over that weekend the family even explored a big shed in the backyard, where they discovered a heap of belongings left behind by previous tenants, as if those people had departed in a hurry and never returned for their things. This was another red flag. Clearly multiple families had abandoned this house before them. Stephen decided to call the landlady and ask directly about the house's history. The phone call, when he finally reached the landlady, was awkward. Trying to sound casual, Stephen inquired if any of the former tenants ever mentioned strange experiences or a ghost. "Oh, I can't remember any," she said. Pressed, she admitted one prior female tenant had claimed her dead father visited her in the house. The landlady dismissed this woman as crazy, and that tenant had left some stuff in the shed when she moved out. Another tenant, a man who had moved out in the middle of the night without warning, also leaving belongings behind. But as to any rumours of haunting, no, the old woman insisted. Never heard anything like that. She then asked sweetly, "Why do you ask?" It was clear to him that the landlady knew something, but he got no useful information from her. The Lachances were on their own. Monday, June 11th, 2001. Around 10 p.m, Stephen was on the phone with his mother, updating her on the situation. The children were in the first floor bedroom, the boys already asleep, his daughter quietly reading. Suddenly, the interior doors throughout the house began rattling in their frames. It started as a light shaking, then grew louder and more violent each time. Annoyed, Stephen yelled for his kids to stop slamming the doors, but his daughter's scared voice called back from the bedroom, "I'm in here reading and the boys are asleep." They hadn't been making the noise at all. What happened next would sear itself into Stephen Lachance's memory and haunt his nightmares for years to come. He later struggled to recount it. Some of it I remember clearly, other parts are a blur to this day. The account goes as follows. The temperature abruptly plummeted by about 30 degrees Fahrenheit, as if a cold wave swept through the house. At the same time, an electrical charge coursed through Stephen's body, the same sensation he felt once before, raising the hair on his arms. A horrible stench flooded the air, an odour so foul and unnatural that it churned his stomach. Stephen shouted into the phone for his mother's help, screaming, "We're getting out," as he realised the entity was manifesting in force. Then came the screams. From a singular scream, the deep male voice he had heard before echoing from above, growing louder and more enraged each second. The whole house began to shake violently, every timber and floorboard shuddering. From somewhere upstairs came the unmistakable sound of heavy footprints thudding down the wooden staircase. Stephen realised with horror that the thing was coming straight towards his children's room on the first floor. Stephen's protective instinct kicked in. He had to reach his kids now. One of the two doors to his bedroom opened directly to the bottom of the stairs, right where the entity was headed. He sprinted towards the bedroom, crossing the shaking floor, as the pounding on the stairs grew deafening. As he reached the bedroom door and grabbed the knob, it wouldn't open. The door seemed to be held shut by an unseen force. Stephen threw his shoulder against the door. It didn't budge. "By this time, I too am screaming," he admitted. He rammed the door again and again, slamming his body into it desperately as the entire house raged with noise. Finally, Stephen burst through the door. It flung open and he stumbled into the room to find his daughter paralysed in fear and his sons awake and crying. The room was chaos. One of the boys' bedroom doors had also slammed open on its own. The family fled through the front door onto the porch with the entity literally on their heels. Stephen heard the second bedroom door slam open behind us, he said, as they escaped. Whatever it was right behind them in pursuit. Stephen started the car and roared up the street to put distance between them and the house of nightmares. He parked at the top of the block where he could just see their home from afar and waited for his parents, whom he'd frantically called, to arrive. As they huddled together in the car, the family watched in disbelief as they reported seeing a black mass moving room to room. That was the final night that the LaChance family ever spent in the Union house. They had lasted 13 days. Everything they owned was still inside, but Stephen didn't care. His priority was to never let his children set foot in there again. In the early morning hours, once the house had fallen silent, he returned with his brother and a friend to grab essentials. Even then, with adult witnesses present, the house did not hide its fury. They heard disembodied screams and angry whispers and thuds from the upstairs, even though the house was empty. It was as if the entity wanted to make sure everyone knew it was real. Finally, Stephen arranged to turn the keys in to the landlady. When he met her outside to hand over the keys, he was still sporting a huge bruise along his arm and side from battering down the door during their escape. The landlady observed him coldly and offered a parting remark that made his blood boil. "Some people are meant to live in an old house like that, and some people aren't. I never thought you were the old house type." With that cryptic scolding, she accepted the keys. Stephen realised that the landlady knew all along something was wrong in that house, and yet she let his family move in anyway. In the weeks after moving out, the LaChances tried to return to normal, but the haunting left deep scars. Night after night, he woke up in a cold sweat from vivid nightmares. He dreamt of a faceless man in the basement shower washing blood off his naked body, while grunting and panting. In these dreams, the man was covered in gore, frantically scrubbing away some terrible deed. Sometimes Stephen would jolt awake and still hear the echo of heavy, laboured breathing in his bedroom. And as always, there were the screams. Even now, 3 years later, I am still waking up in the night by the memory of the screaming man, he wrote in 2004. It soon became clear that the house continued to wreak havoc. Local gossip and eyewitnesses told Stephen that other families who tried moving in after him also fled in terror. In one instance, within a year of his departure, a neighbour observed police cars racing to the house at night, and a family standing outside in their pyjamas, staring back at their house from the front lawn. The pattern repeated. New tenants would move in, only stay a couple of months or weeks, then abandon the lease, sometimes without even taking their furniture. In fact, between 1999 and early 2002, 7 different families lived at 809 North Christina Avenue, an astonishing turnover. Clearly the house had a long-standing reputation on the street. That explains why those neighbours would cross the road rather than walk in front of it. By autumn 2003, the landlady apparently gave up trying to rent it as a home. According to Steve, the landlady turned it into a dog kennel that fall. Even as a kennel, however, the building did not fully escape its dark passenger, but at least no family was sleeping there nightly. One later source claims that the kennel staff would not stay alone overnight, and that photos taken inside often showed strange anomalies. In 2004, about 3 years after the ordeal, Stephen started writing down the whole story as a first-hand account and posting it on the internet. The online account spread quickly in paranormal circles, garnering both sympathy and curiosity. And it ultimately connected him with the next chapter of the saga, Helen's story. Not long after Stephen shared his story publicly, he learned to his horror that the Union House was occupied again. Through paranormal community contacts, he was introduced to Helen, a pseudonym used in accounts, a middle-aged grandmother who had moved into the house with some of her family. Helen had been drawn to the spacious rental home just as Stephen was. It seemed perfect for her and her grandchildren she was raising. She did not know its dark history. Soon, however, unexplained occurrences started driving Helen to the brink, very much like what had happened to the Lachances. When Stephen and Helen first spoke, he realised her experiences mirrored his own and then some. Determined not to let another family go through what his did, Stephen vowed to help Helen free her home from the entity. He thus found himself reluctantly stepping back into the nightmare he thought he'd escaped, this time as an investigator. In late 2004, he and a few colleagues formed the Missouri Paranormal Research Society, a team that would assist Helen. Helen, frightened, exhausted, and out of options, became their first and most urgent client. Helen's recounting of the phenomena in the house reveals a relentless onslaught. Eerie sounds were a near nightly occurrence. Helen would often lie in bed hearing somebody breathing in the dark next to her, a heavy, rasping breathing, despite her being alone in the room. Footsteps were heard trampling overhead on the second floor and even coming down the staircase when no physical person was there. Sometimes she heard soft whispers in the hall. Poltergeist activity plagued her household objects. Small items would disappear and reappear in odd places. Doors that Helen knew she had locked would be found standing open, and more than once she'd return from errands to find all the lights on. A replay of what the Lachances experienced. Once she came home to discover every window wide open, something she would never have left that way in winter. Clearly, the entity was still flexing its ability to manipulate the physical environment. Electrical disturbances went beyond just lights. Light bulbs would explode or burn out at an abnormal rate. The electrical transformer on the street blew out repeatedly for no clear reason. On one occasion, the rain gutters inexplicably caught fire, as if some surge of energy shot through the house's structure. Bizarre, spontaneous damage occurred. Helen's little granddaughter had a favourite doll which she kept in her room. One day they found the doll mutilated. All its hair had been cut off. The young girl swore she hadn't touched it, and nobody else in the house had either. The entity also attacked people directly. Helen's grade school-aged grandson was standing near the top of the staircase one day when an invisible force shoved him. He tumbled down part of the stairs, luckily only bruising himself, but he was certain something tried to push him down to seriously hurt or kill him. After that, the children in Helen's care were terrified of the upstairs. Perhaps one of the most unnerving incidences involved local authorities. Late one night, the police banged on Helen's door saying they had received an emergency call from her number. Somebody at her address had dialed 911 and reported a suicidal person at the house. Helen was stunned. She had made no such call, and she was the only person home at the time. The police searched and found nothing amiss, but it appeared the entity was capable of manipulating phone lines or masquerading as a human voice to call for help, as if mocking Helen or trying to get her into trouble. She confided to Stephen that whenever she left the house, she felt constantly watched, followed even. She would see dark shapes out of the corner of her eye. The haunting was not contained by walls. It followed her about her life. A true sign of demonic oppression. Desperate, Helen had initially sought help anywhere she could. Paranormal teams from all over were invited in 2004 to 2005 to investigate Union House. Unfortunately, many were amateur ghost hunters, Steve noted. That the so-called investigators flocked to the house but were proven unhelpful or even harmful. Some treated it as a spooky thrill rather than a family in crisis. Different psychics gave wildly contradictory readings of what spirit there was there. One claimed it was multiple demons, another claimed it was the ghost of a Native American, causing confusion. Even the clergy were approached, ministers from various churches, but many were reluctant to get involved. On visits, some priests or pastors became visibly uncomfortable and left quickly. In short, no one provided effective relief. In fact, things kept getting worse for Helen. By mid-2005, Helen was in serious danger. Stephen's team witnessed an alarming transformation in Helen. She was undergoing what they believed was demonic oppression, the phase before full possession, where a person's will and personality erode under spiritual attack. Helen became paranoid, erratic, and depressed. She began having violent thoughts that were utterly unlike her normal self. For instance, she grew convinced that her husband was cheating on her, despite no evidence. In a frenzied state, Helen actually drove to her husband's workplace with a knife, intending to attack him. Disturbingly, one of her daughter's friends, also a frequent visitor to the haunted house and lightly influenced by it, handed Helen the knife and praised its sharpness, egging her on. Thankfully, Helen did not get to follow through. This incident led to her husband fully believing that something terrible was going on. On multiple occasions, Helen's eyes reportedly turned solid black during her outbursts, a phenomenon often cited in possession cases as a sign of an entity manifesting within. Mild-mannered by nature, she would eventually snarl profanity and express homicidal urges to harm her family members. She later said it felt like somebody else was in her head, feeding her rage and paranoia. Helen's teenage daughter and the daughter's friends who hung out at the house also started behaving oddly, dabbling in Ouija boards, speaking of dark presences. Her husband admitted something supernatural was going on, but was too frightened to involve himself, and was quoted as saying, "I was brought up to leave such things alone." That attitude persisted until the night Helen, in a possessed trance, tried to stab Charlie to death, believing him an enemy. Though she didn't succeed in harming him, it was the final straw. Her husband fled the situation entirely, effectively abandoning Helen and moving out for his own safety. At her lowest point, Helen was suicidal and on the verge of being fully possessed. Stephen LeChance and his colleagues realised that this was beyond a haunting. They did the only humane thing left. They got Helen into medical and spiritual care immediately. She was admitted to a psychiatric hospital for a time to ensure she wouldn't harm herself or others. Stephen leveraged his Catholic connections, he himself was raised Catholic, to find a Catholic priest experienced in exorcism who was willing to aid Helen. This priest, unnamed in accounts, began working with Helen through a series of exorcism prayers and counselling sessions. The road back for Helen was long and painful. Helen vacated the house finally and went to stay with a relative a few towns away. She later lamented that they couldn't afford a different place earlier due to financial constraints, which is why they endured the horror so long. But now, with her safety and sanity at stake, leaving was non-negotiable. By December 2005, Helen's family had moved out of Union House for good. The house stood empty once more. In the aftermath, Helen required years of therapy and religious guidance. The Roman Catholic priest who continued to counsel her performed blessings, and with each session, Helen regained more of herself. Stephen reported that through years of therapy sessions with both a psychiatrist and competent priest, Helen eventually recovered. By around 2007, she was back to being the loving mother and grandmother she had been, her personality intact, her faith in God renewed. The dark influence that had nearly destroyed her was gone. Notably, no exorcism had yet been performed on the house itself. Realising the magnitude of what they were dealing with, Stephen LeChance and his team sought the help of the Catholic Church, one of the few institutions with protocols for genuine demonic infestations. The Church took the claims seriously. Priests and demonologists were dispatched to investigate the Union House and Helen's case. After careful documentation, the Archdiocese of St. Louis prepared a thorough internal report on the case. This ended up being a 156-page dossier, an unusually extensive study for a single haunting. In it, the church investigators catalogued the screams, physical assaults and psychological assaults, and concluded the house was indeed host to a strong demonic presence. The Union House case was so striking that a prominent priest later described it as having all 3 stages of a demonic haunting present. Armed with this evidence, and with approval from church authorities, a formal exorcism of the property was planned. The details are not extensively published. Such rites are usually kept confidential, but sources close to Stephen indicate that an exorcism ritual was conducted in 2006 on the Union Screaming House. During the rites, it said the house shook and eerie screams were heard, much like what the families had experienced, but this time as an apparent reaction to the exorcism. In the end, the priest declared the house cleansed. Present around this time was paranormal investigator Lorraine Warren. She was briefed on the case and spoke to Stephen and Helen. Lorraine gave them a piece of advice that proved ominously true. The initial haunting is just the beginning. She meant that even after a person escapes severe haunting or a possession attempt, the spiritual fallout, the aftershocks, can reverberate for years. The seed of darkness once planted might try to sprout somewhere else. Indeed, Stephen later experienced bizarre activity in subsequent homes, doors opening, shadows following his family, suggesting something had latched onto them temporarily. And Helen, even away from the house, needed long-term support to fully shake the spiritual oppression. Lorraine was precisely right. The story didn't simply end with leaving the house, but at least the worst was over. Following the exorcism, the Catholic Church's report on the Union House was archived as a case study. Stephen LeChance was eventually allowed to see parts of it, and he incorporated the Church's analysis in his later writings. The Church's involvement lent a great deal of credibility to the case in the paranormal field. After Helen's family left and the house was exorcised, it spent considerable time empty. No further major incidences were publicised from 2006 onward inside the house. One of the most intriguing aspects of the Screaming House case is the historical backstory that investigators pieced together. While no single smoking gun explains the haunting, a constellation of tragic and violent events connected to the property likely set the stage for its malevolence. To start, the house sits on land that was once owned by Captain John Thomas Crow. This man was believed to be the apparition that Steve saw. Crowe was a notable figure in 19th century Union. He had served in the Civil War and later became a sheriff, a judge, the president of a school board, and even led the local morals committee. In short, he was a pillar of the community. Crowe married into the wealthy Breckenridge family. The Breckenridges, like prominent families of that era, owned enslaved people prior to the Civil War, and those enslaved individuals lived on Crowe's property. In fact, the Union Screaming House, which was built in 1932, was constructed on what had been part of Crowe's estate, specifically an area believed to have held the slave quarters or horse stables. There is a local legend that during the Civil War, a tragedy struck among those enslaved on the property. One enslaved man murdered his own wife with an axe in a fit of rage. But beyond Crowe and slavery, the house is physically surrounded by death and violent hotspots. Directly behind the house there are two historic buildings that once served as the town's general store and saloon in the 1800s. According to historical notes, those establishments saw their share of numerous brawls and shootings, some ending in death. The opposite side of the house stood two older homes where particularly dark incidences occurred in the 20th century. In one home in 1973, a domestic dispute turned fatal when a woman shot her husband dead and then committed suicide with the gun. Next door to that house, in around 1997, a father died in tragic circumstances. So all in all, there have been a lot of tragic things that have occurred around the house. Thanks to Stephen LeChance's efforts, it became one of the most well-documented hauntings of the 21st century, a story that has since been told and retold in books, televisions, podcasts like this, and different articles. And Stephen first published his personal account, The Uninvited, online in 2004. In 2005 to 2006, as the case was wrapped up, he was already expanding that story into a book. Stephen LeChance's book is called The Uninvited, The True Story of the Union Screaming House, which detailed the 13-day ordeal and Helen's harrowing experiences. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch named The Uninvited one of the best books of 2008 and praised it for its compelling narrative. The house itself, 809 North Christina Avenue, still stands to this day. An ordinary looking white framed house on a suburban street. In recent years, it's been referenced as one of the scariest houses in America. I hope you enjoyed this episode and thank you for listening to the podcast as always. And don't forget, if you have your own paranormal experience or maybe there's a case that you'd like me to cover, you can let me know. You can find all the links below for everything you need. Thank you for listening and join me next time for another episode of Scary.
You know how everything's a subscription now? Music, movies, even socks. I swear if I...
To continue this ad, please upgrade to Premium Plus Platinum.
What? No. Anyway, Blue Apron...
This is a pay-per-listen ad. Please confirm your billing.
Oh, that's annoying. At least with the new Blue Apron, there's no subscription needed. Get delicious meals delivered without the weekly plan.
Wait, no subscription?
Keep the flavor. Ditch the subscription. Get 20% off your first two orders with code APRON20. Terms and conditions apply. Visit blueapron.com/terms for more.
You've worked hard since you arrived in the city, gained loads of experience, developed your skills. Everywhere you look, you see something you helped build. But now, you're looking to the future. And maybe you're thinking about where you come from. In Ireland, we need planners, carpenters, plumbers, roofers, engineers, architects, site managers, and more. We need you, with all your skills and knowledge, to help us build thousands of homes. You've built the world. Now come back and build the home that built you. For more information, visit gov.ie/Building Ireland. Brought to you by the Government of Ireland.
I'm Dr. Sarah Ray Hall, the founder and CEO of Armra. I developed Armor Colostrum because I know your body was designed to thrive. It's your natural state, your birthright, and you can reclaim it. Colostrum is the first nutrition we receive in life, with every essential nutrient our bodies need. It's nature's original blueprint for health. After a devastating health crisis almost took my life, I made it my mission to harness this power. Using proprietary technology, Armra captures over 400 bioactive nutrients in every scoop, delivering over 1,000 benefits that transform your health at its foundation. Whether for gut health, metabolism, skin, hair, immunity, mood, energy, fitness, or recovery, I invite you to join this collective revival of health and discover radical transformation for yourself. Visit armor.com, that's ARMRA.com, and enter code CULTURE30 for 30% off your first subscription order. This statement has not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
You've worked hard since you arrived in the city, gained loads of experience, developed your skills. Everywhere you look, you see something you helped build. But now, you're looking to the future. And maybe you're thinking about where you come from. In Ireland, we need planners, carpenters, plumbers, roofers, engineers, architects, site managers, and more. We need you, with all your skills and knowledge, to help us build thousands of homes. You've built the world. Now come back and build the home that built you. For more information, visit gov.ie/Building Ireland. Brought to you by the Government of Ireland.
For 25 years, Brightview Senior Living Associates have been committed to creating a vibrant culture and delivering exceptional services, making Brightview a great place to work and live. If you're looking for a rewarding opportunity to serve your local community and grow, we want you to join our team. Brightview Senior Living is growing and actively seeking vibrant associates to join our community teams, including directors, healthcare, activities, hospitality, and dining. Apply today at careers.brightviewseniorliving.com. Equal employment opportunities. Text BV Jobs to 97211 to apply.